Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion will focus on client health as a discussion in ConfigMgr, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So client health actually is one session that I hadn't really planned to record, but through recent discussions with a few different customers, client health seems to be something that folks, well, let's be honest, making sure the client is healthy in ConfigMgr has been a needed item ever since ConfigMgr has been a product, right? And we've certainly gotten a whole lot better through the years to give you the tools and capabilities to look at client health and understand client health. And still, in recent discussions, I realized that customers don't seem to totally understand how to use the native capabilities of ConfigMgr to do that. They're looking for SQL queries or third-party ways to go through and look at client health when really all of what you need is at your fingertips. So thought I would do a session on that and understand what it is. So here's our agenda. What is client health and why we care, right? And then I want to talk about for a minute the idea of client health versus configuration health. And then the items that I want to really focus on for client health are listed. We'll end up with a couple of tips and tricks and go from there. So what is client health, right? Well, client health is all about having a healthy ConfigMgr client, to which you say, hey, thanks, Steve. Didn't realize that, right? Which obviously that is a statement defined by a similar statement. But the reality is, in the ConfigMgr world, in order to properly manage a client, we need that client to be healthy, right? And be able to respond to the configurations we will throw down to the client. So what is health? So the health of the ConfigMgr client, I first need to state, is different than saying that the operating system, the system the client is running on, is healthy. Now, typically the two do go hand in hand, that you have a healthy client running on a healthy operating system. But that is not always the case. Another way to say that, it's very possible that you could have a fully healthy, responsive ConfigMgr client that's running on an OS that might have some problems. Give you a couple of examples. So let's say that we have a configuration manager client showing up healthy, green in the console, the different indicators we'll see in just a minute, and you deploy a software update to that client. The client gets the software update, the client tries to install the software update, but the client can't install the software update. And you investigate, you figure out that the reason is that the servicing subsystem on the OS is unhealthy in some way. So the ConfigMgr client itself is perfectly healthy and is able to try to carry out the instructions that are sent to it, but because of other deficiencies somewhere else, it's not able to do so. I'll give you another one. So this one is one that's still, unfortunately, more common than it should be. Let's say that we have a ConfigMgr client running on an operating system where we have not introduced the antivirus exclusions that have been documented for years and years and years as being necessary to effectively run ConfigMgr client on a system and server, right? So we might send down the instructions, the ConfigMgr client gets the instructions, tries to go execute it, and just can't. There was a situation I saw recently where there was content that needed to be downloaded, and it was, and then the ConfigMgr client tried to go access that content, and it was gone, right? And the indications were that the antivirus software had gotten in there and prevented the system from totally committing the files, and you know, we were in this weird situation. Is that an unhealthy ConfigMgr client? No, not at all. It's something else that is impacting health, and I could go on and on and on in examples, you know, like this. So one thing that we also have to think of in terms of client health is this is not ever a place that we are totally arrived at, right? There are ways that we can make this fairly consistent in organizations and try to mitigate having to always be chasing client health. But this is something that we always, as administrators, need to keep in the back of our mind. How healthy are our clients, right? And there's ways to do that. There's indicators in the console that will help you with that you will see. But it's not fix it today, forget about it tomorrow. It's ongoing. And then when we think about client health, there's two big buckets that we can think about. Collective client health across your enterprise, and then individual client health. So whenever we look at enterprises of any size, even if you have a few thousand machines, that's really hard to try to get your get a hand around individually. But if you're in an environment of 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 clients, you need a way to effectively measure and understand your client health across that mass number of devices. And ConfigMgr gives you those abilities. You also need to understand and have insight into individual systems and how they're responding when we get to that level. And ConfigMgr gives you those capabilities as well. So as we talk about the things coming up, you'll see examples in both categories. And I'll try to remember to call those out as we go along. So why do we care about client health? Well, anyone who's been around ConfigMgr for any moment of time understands client health is all about reliability. It's all about performance, being able to actually have the ConfigMgr client perform or do the proper functions that you're asking it to do, and on and on. It's absolutely critical that we have a healthy client in order to effectively manage by ConfigMgr. Now, here's this interesting topic, right? So I had a conversation the other day with an individual who basically looked at client health and said, it looks like our clients are healthy, but why do we keep getting these errors, right? And that's when I coined my phrase. It may have been used by other people, but to me it was new. There is a difference between client health and configuration health. Another way to say that, if you have healthy clients, that does not mean that your configurations are going to be healthy, right? They should be, but that doesn't necessarily equate. Let me give you a couple of examples. So let's assume that we have a configuration manager client that's healthy, and you send a deployment to it of a software update, but somehow have forgotten to either install or make available a WSUS server, a software update point, for that client. So the client will get the instructions, will try to carry out the instructions. The very first thing that it's going to try to do is a scan of your environment. If it can't do the scan, then it can never go forward and do the install of the update that you're sending to it. Is that a client health problem? Not at all. It's a configuration problem because things aren't as they should be from a configuration perspective to get things done. Here's another one. Let's say that we have a piece of software that we want to deploy out. And you send it out, and the clients receive it, and they try to go execute it, and they fail because the software is actually not available to them on a distribution point in the environment. Maybe it's on most of your distribution points, and you forgot some distribution points, and the client can't reach a distribution point to pull down the content. That is going to be a failure. Is that a client health problem? Not at all. It's a configuration issue, right? So having healthy clients, absolutely critical. Healthy clients by themselves does not mean that you're not going to have some issues. You can have issues due to configurations. For a number of reasons, I could just go on the configuration health kind of topic, right? But they're different discussions. In fact, as I'm recording this, I'm going to have a troubleshooting discussion in a few days with one customer. And that's where we're going to dig into the configuration health and understanding what's going on and trying to be able to, when things do go wrong, how do we troubleshoot them and see, those things. And definitely not going there in this session, but just to kind of show you that they are two different discussions, right? Okay, so let's get into the specifics and start talking through the capabilities that are native to Configuration Manager. The first stop along that path is this thing called the Client Health Dashboard. So I have this screenshot. I'll have a few more screenshots. As we go through, I'll pull in the console, show you there as well. But this is the first place. This was introduced in Configuration Manager 1902. Very, very, very powerful view of your client health. And so let me pull in the lab. And we will take a look at this live. So let's pull in the Config Manager console. The way I navigate to this is I go to monitoring as soon as the config manager console decides, oops, it crashed out on me. That was exciting. Let's do this again. So pull up the config manager console and go under monitoring when we get there. All right, cool. Here's monitoring. And then we'll go to client status. Let me pull down a little bit here. Client status. And then under client status, we'll go to client health dashboard, which is right here. Right now, this is my lab, so it's not hugely exciting. But here you can see that I'm focused in on all systems. I can actually specify how many days that I want to allow clients that are in an active state, right, to be focused in on. We'll talk about active state later. Do I want to include clients, client health for offline clients? We'll talk about that one in a minute too, whether clients show offline or online and how we can tell. And then, do we only want to show unhealthy client details? Another way of viewing that is, hey, I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with the clients that are unhealthy. I don't really care to have a view of healthy clients. I know those are okay. And then you can scroll down. You can see the overall client health. Again, this is my lab, so not totally exciting, right? But I can see it there. I can see the various versions of clients that are out there. I can look at the OSs that are out there. I don't know if this will change for me real quick. Let me just add these in. Yeah, we see that this is adapting. Yeah, okay. Let me get rid of that. All right, cool. So we have a different view depending on the checkbox that I put in. And then also down here, we have a whole list of things that are critical for the client's function, such as the client health evaluation. Talk about that in a minute. Policy requests, software inventory, hardware inventory, all these things, right? We'll see the status of them across the swath of your clients. So you have a really good indicator as to what's going on in your environment by looking at this dashboard, right? So this was introduced in 1902. The lab environment you see is a 2002 lab environment as of this recording, but still, this is probably what I would consider to be the first stop if I want to get an overall perspective of client health. And I mentioned a minute ago that Config Manager allows you to look at client health collectively and individually. This is a collective view of your client health that you can still tailor a bit the way you want to. All right, so that's one item. Another item is this thing called client online status. Now, this is interesting. This was first introduced in 1602, so it's been around a while. And what this means is we have a visual indicator here of whether a client is healthy or whether it's not. So you see a green check mark. A green check mark means that we know that this client has been online and communicating with us within the last 5 minutes, right? So it used to be, we've had client health discussions through the years as different things have entered the product, and we've tried to figure out different ways to leverage them and so on. And we're always looking for that indicator that is the closest to real time. So prior to this, I would be looking at something like heartbeat discovery or policy cycle, probably policy cycle, right? Here, I know this is supposed to be updated within the past 5 minutes. And so the point is, whenever I do a deployment or an operation of my clients, if I see a large swath of them that have a green check mark, we know that the client's actively communicating. We stand a really good chance, assuming our configuration is good, of getting things installed or deployed or done by that client that we're asking for. Whereas this big X right here, red X, basically says, yeah, the client's not online, right? The client is not online. Now that's interesting, right? That's interesting because having a client that shows a red X, that does not mean that that client is necessarily unhealthy. What it means is that your client is not online to be able to communicate with the site right now. So why might your client be healthy, but yet not online to communicate with the site right now? Well, maybe it's turned off. Maybe it's been disconnected from the corporate network and you have no way to reach it, which we will mention here. I'll mention it now, which you should have a way to reach it called the Cloud Management Gateway that every organization that runs Config Manager and manages clients that could possibly ever be off the network needs to have that feature enabled. But let's say that you don't. Clients offline, not connected in any way, then it will show offline. Doesn't mean it's not healthy. It means that it's currently offline. Then we have a question mark. Client online status is just not known, right? This particular client has been installed, but it's never completed the install. And so it shows up in the console and it shows a question mark. It expects to have data, but we don't have any. And then we have a couple of clients down here that don't have anything, which means they never have had the client installed at all, and so we don't have a status. Or I should say they've never had the client installed in such a way that was successfully able to communicate with the console, and so we have no record of that client being there, right? Okay, so beyond the client status is clearly visible on the device icon. You might want to do something more with it, right? So you can come into the device icon, you can look at it all day, no problem, but you might want to do some more things with it. For example, you might want to build a collection of devices that are currently active or maybe currently inactive in your environment, right? So maybe this is a criteria that you build in your collection membership. Now that gets into a whole tangent discussion about strategy for when you do that, how you manage that, right? Because what you never want to do is only include green checkmark clients and forget about the rest of them, right? You always want to understand what's going on from a client health perspective in your environment. All right, so let me pull back in the lab and we'll look at that real quick. So if I go to my devices view, and look, I actually, strangely, have one machine that is showing a green check mark. I know why, but you see a bunch that are currently offline, including my domain controllers, which is interesting. So I have one. Now, what I've done is I've built a device collection to show me client online status. I have exactly one machine in there, the one that is currently online, right? So this does work. Now, the criteria that I've used is a WQL query because for those that don't know, in the console, with very, very, very rare exceptions, you do not use SQL, you use WQL, which is very similar to SQL in some ways. But here is the query statement that I'm using to go get that, right? And so if I show the query language, it's right here. Right, so this query, and you can find examples like this on the internet and so on, but this is a good way to be able to focus in on client health. Now, whenever you do this, be aware that if you have machines, well, let me say that. You'll see this in a minute, right? So another way that you might actually want to view client health is through a report. There's customers that I've worked with that find a report to be quite helpful here. So I went and put that SQL query, or WQL query, into a report that I can run whenever I want to through the console. So if I look at the different reports, go back up, and look at the report categories, if I can get my mouse to cooperate, come on mouse, there, and look down at client status, which we'll come back to in a minute. Here, then I have a report that will show online and offline. So if I run this, then you'll see a list of my machines currently, and currently there should be one machine showing online and two machines showing offline. But we'll look at some details about that report as soon as it renders here. Okay, here it comes. And there it is. So we have one machine showing online. I have these machines showing offline. If I can get that to scroll right here, right? So now let me contrast that to the collection or to the device view. So if I go up under device views, you will see this many devices. So a bunch of them, like 11, I think, devices. But if you look at the report, I only show you 5. What's the difference? The difference is that in order for a client to show an online status, it has to actually have been a client at some point. Those that don't have a client installed or are in an unknown status, they don't show up here, right? They don't show up here at all because we don't have a successful client installed. So this is only looking at clients that would be expected to have a status. And so this is something you can do through SQL reporting services if you would like to, kind of like I did. Right? Okay, so client online status is a huge thing to help you understand what systems you would expect right now if you send a deployment to actually take that deployment on and be able to do it. So what about client activity? So client activity actually is presented in two forms for you. One is in the dashboard view like you see here, and then there's also status that you can see for each individual client. Let me show you that. Let's go back into the lab and I'll show that to you. Now, so if I want to start in the dashboard, which I do, let me go collapse these reports. There we go. And go down to client status, and you'll see, oops, just passed it, client activity, right here. Client activity dashboard. So this is mine currently. I have 5 active, 1 inactive, and then others. Now, you look at this and you say, wait a minute, Steve. You just showed me your client online status. And there was 1 client that was online and active, and there were 4 more that were not. They were inactive. They were not showing a green check mark. How is that compared to this thing that shows client activity? Well, quite simply, this way, right? Client activity measures whether the site has heard from that client in a couple of key ways within a certain time frame, right? We expect, another way of saying it, we expect that a client may turn off from time to time, and their green check mark will go to a red X. That doesn't mean they're not an active client. We expect that a client may be removed from your corporate network and taken somewhere where they don't have an internet connection for some reason, or even if they do, they don't VPN into the network or whatever. That client is still active, it's just not able to communicate right now, right? And so they're different measures. This is saying that we've heard from that client within the configured threshold, so we are marking it active. Well, great, Steve. What does that mean? What is this configured threshold? Well, so if I go to client activity and right click, I can choose my client status settings. All of these are for 7 days, right? All of these are. So that means that as long as the client has responded to the site for a given area within 7 days, that area is considered active. Now, there are some key areas that we focus on to determine active or inactive. And those areas are right up top: client policy, heartbeat, and hardware inventory. If we have not heard from the client on one of these key areas within 7 days, it is then marked inactive, right? So one of these 3 has to communicate with us in order for us to maintain an active status. You can configure these if you want to. Do that with caution, but they are configurable, right? And then there's also the option here, if you want to change, and do this with caution too, how often the site deals with reassessing activity or the active state of a client, you can change that here. By default, we do it once a day. Usually that should be enough. If you're in a situation where you need to have that recalculated for some reason on a quicker basis, which there could be some reasons to historically, then you can change it there. Now with the green check mark and some other client health dashboard and some things like that, really not probably that necessary, but it's there in case you need it. So that's, again, think about collective, individual. This is the collective way to assess client activity. But we can see it on an individual basis as well. So if I go back to assets and compliance, I look at my client active status, then I can look at client activity right through here, right? Well, first of all, I see it. Let me scroll down. I see client activity right here, active, right? So we're marking this machine as active. We also have a green check mark. Well, I have this machine and this machine, active, inactive, and then the third one that's active, right? These first 2 have red X's. This one is kind of in a weird state, right? And so, but this doesn't change until the thresholds that I just mentioned were exceeded. So look at this one, 514. as of this recording, this is 517 on my system. And so the policy request, the heartbeat DDR, hardware inventory, this one's right at the edge, but this one, heartbeat DDR, right at the edge as well. But certainly policy has been requested within the allotted 7 days, and so we still mark this client as active. Whereas this one, we've exceeded those thresholds, and so now it's marked inactive, right? So again, this is not the same as client online status. It's another measure, and you factor all of these things together when you're trying to assess whether a client is active or not. And these things that I'm looking at also, as you're looking at machines to decide, hey, this one is in a problem state, I need to reinstall the client or whatever else, right? You can look at these thresholds. When was the last time it's in a policy request? When was the last time it did a hardware inventory, whatever, and make a judgment to say, hey, I can connect to that machine, but I haven't heard anything from that machine for 3 months. So, hey, it's a pretty good idea that probably there's something wrong with that machine, and you can start to use that data and look to troubleshoot information or pick the clients to troubleshoot further, based on that information, right? Okay. All right, cool. So I want to emphasize again. In today's world, with the tools available to us, namely the Cloud Management Gateway, you can maintain a persistent green check mark to any client anywhere in the world as long as they are connected to the internet, right? So there's a whole swath of clients that you may not be able to manage today because they're not connected to your corporate network. But if you had a way to manage them, it would allow you to have a better response rate with those machines. I'll give you an example. So there was a customer I was working with that had a situation with ransomware. Whenever that ransomware attack came out, I forget what it was called. It's been several months ago. And they, in response to the ransomware, had to go touch every single machine and make sure remediations were in place. And they were very successful doing that very quickly for machines that were online. But then they found the thousands of machines that were not online. And so they had to go into a lockdown scenario for literally about 11 weeks to try to reach out to all of these machines and finally get them remediated, because the user was offline. For whatever reason, you couldn't get to it. The machine was off in a closet somewhere, which nothing will fix except turning it back on, right? And at the end of this process, we had a discussion to say, this effort that you just spent 11 weeks 24/7 on, if we would have had the Cloud Management Gateway, we could have been done with all of the machines that were possible to reach within about 2 or 3 hours, because they're connected. We can reach them. We can manage them, right? Versus 11 weeks in a 24/7 lockdown. And the value becomes starkly clear, right, of having the Cloud Management Gateway, being able to touch these machines that are not necessarily on your network right now, all right? So every environment, I'll say it again, needs to have the Cloud Management Gateway, unless you just have no machines that ever leave your on-prem network, okay? All right, so that's client activity. What about client check, right? So this is also known as your client health check, right? So this is something that you also can access through the console. So let me pull back up the console for just a moment, and I'll show it to you. Oh, the console went away again. That happens in my lab for some reason. I don't know why, but it's okay. So this is accessed through the console in the monitoring node, just like we were. All right, and we can go down to client status. And then we have activity, once I get down there again, client activity. All right, so this will show, client check. Sorry, I was going back. Right, so here's what we're looking at, client check. And so here, we're seeing all the machines that have passed our check, how many have failed, how many don't have any results, and so on in this pie chart. Again, collective versus individual, right? Just like on client activity, there's a collective way and there's an individual client way, right? So what is this thing called client check? So what this does, every 24 hours, unless you change the configuration, the ConfigMgr client will go through an assessment of different things that are critical to its proper function. And when it finds a problem in those areas, it will, by default, automatically remediate. Now, there's ways to disable the automatic remediation, but still the checks will run unless you disable them, right? And so I'll show you what the checks are, and we'll talk through them in just a minute. But we run through that, and we'll report back our status to the console. Well, one might immediately say, well, wait a minute, what if the client's broken? Will we still get the results back? And the answer is yes. This is a process that runs independently from the client being healthy or not, right? And so actually, let me show you real quick. I'll just pop this up. This is on my corporate machine, so I'll show you. This has the ConfigMgr client installed, and there's one key area. Come on down. Windows, nope. Windows, CCM. And so it's called CCM eval. CCM eval, right down here. CCM eval. So here's CCM eval XSD. So that's the database. Here's the XML that defines all the things. Here's the actual executable that runs. There's also a log that we use to track the activity of it right here called CCM eval.log, right? And so we'll track all of the results of that client check and send it back up to the site. Now this runs completely separate from the ConfigMgr client. If you turn the ConfigMgr client off, you would still get the client checks to run. They have to run outside of the client. Otherwise, if the client's broken, the checks won't ever be reported out, right? Okay, so we'll evaluate again every day, unless you've changed it, to be able to see what's going on. So this is the collective view. We also have this individually on devices. So let me show you a couple of devices. So this is my current device, and we have, look, client check details. And if we look at it, we'll see a green check mark, evaluation succeeded, but look at the evaluation time, the 14th of April. Well, right now, it's the 17th of May. So what's going on here? Why have we, you said, Steve, that it runs every day. Why are we just seeing this from a little bit over a month ago? Well, the reason is that we do run every single day, and we store the state of our evaluation every time we run it. And if that state actually changes, then we'll report up a different message. But if the state does not change, then we don't send up anything new because nothing's changed. So what this means is since the 14th of April, I've run this check again and again and again, and nothing's changed. I'm still healthy and passing the checks that I've been put through, and so I'm good. Go up to this client. Again, 414, evaluation succeeded. Don't think that's right. Or you might look at the red X and say, well, that's not right. Well, yeah, it is, right? Because we already talked about what the red X means. Look at this one. There's 414 again. So this has some consistency to it. Let's see, check this one. There's a 48, right? And so we see all of these. So this is my lab environment. Not a huge surprise that my machines are healthy as a general rule, right? A bit of detail here. If you're running a Windows 7 client, then this is going to run as a scheduled task. If you're running a Windows 10 build of the OS, then this is going to plug into and run under the Windows 10 maintenance window for that OS, right? Now, this check is awesome, but what does it actually do? Well, down here, I've detailed all of the things that we do as a part of that health check. I'm not going to read them to you, but these are the things we go through, right? And then the very next question oftentimes is, hey, great, can we add anything to this? The answer, absolutely not. Would not be supported at all. Well, wait, Steve, it's an XML file. Can't we go ahead and edit that? Yeah, I guess technically. It's not supported, and it probably won't work, right? So these are the ones that are done, focused on the ConfigMgr client to make sure all the prerequisites are there, all the function is there, WMI is responding, all the namespaces are there, and so on. And again, if we run into a problem, we'll go ahead and remediate what's going on in that issue. Okay. So device console. So those are the biggies, right? Those are the biggies, but there's some other useful things here. Device console. So if you, this is a screenshot from my lab. Let me just go ahead and pull the lab back in and show it to you live. So if you're looking at really any area of the console and you have column headers and so on, we'll give you a list of what we believe is critical for you to have in front of you to make judgments based on the area of console you're in. But there's a ton of other things that you can bring to bear in the console. So go in here, right-click on something, and you have all of these attributes that you can choose from and add to the console to customize your view if that would help you, right? And then under last, there's all these things: last online time, last offline time. There's a device online status, and on we go, right? A lot of things in here that could be beneficial to you. If you want to tailor your view so that you can more effectively investigate what's going on, then it's there, right? Okay, so in terms of decommissioned and obsolete, so I'll just talk through this one. So there's two categories that you might have for a client. Well, I guess there's three. There's the active client record, but then there's two other kinds of records you might have. The first is called a decommissioned record. So if ConfigMgr marks a record for deletion, one thing to know about it is, first, it's going to be marked as decommissioned, but it is not deleted immediately, right? Instead, it's marked as decommissioned. So in the database, it's marked as decommissioned. Because it's marked as decommissioned, you won't see it in the console, but it's still in the database, right? And then at a maintenance task time, decommissioned systems will be purged out of the database. But here's a point. Oh, and here's something too. If you as the admin, and this is behavior that actually changed from ConfigMgr 2007 to ConfigMgr 2012, right? Which this is a total tangent thing right here, but I'll use the opportunity. You know, it's so many customers that I've come across that have either built their ConfigMgr 2012 plus infrastructure in the same way that they built 2007, or they had consultants come in and ended up having it built the same way as it was in 2007. If that's the case for you, then fundamentally, whoever built that does not understand, likely does not understand, that ConfigMgr 2007 and 2012 may look very similar. They are functionally, under the covers, very different, very, very different products. And the way you build them and configure them and deal with them are very similar in terms of function, very different, though, in terms of configuring, right? So just be aware of that. That's one example. Decommissioned records are not deleted immediately. When you as an admin go into a devices node and delete a device, it does not get deleted from the database immediately. It gets marked as decommissioned. We will hide it from the console, so the console doesn't show it to you. You think that you've deleted it, and you have, but it's not really deleted for a time. This also is a place for another tangent, right? I run across customers frequently who will find SQL queries or build SQL queries themselves to go query data out of the database to answer certain questions. And certainly, SQL queries will pull anything out that you want if you know how to ask for it. But a couple of bullet points here. First of all, running live SQL queries against the database, if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you're gonna maybe find yourself in a blind alley. And here's what I mean. And the discussion that I'm talking about here is perfectly illustrative of it. Certainly not the only example. If you're trying to get a list of machines that match a certain criteria, it is very possible that you will pull a list of decommissioned machines and operate on that list and wonder why the lists don't agree with what you see in the ConfigMgr console. And it's because the list that comes out of SQL directly is not going to be filtered to exclude decommissioned records unless you tell it to do so and you know that it needs to be done. And so you're going to end up with a data list that is not accurate. And you're going to then wonder, well, why is ConfigMgr not giving me accurate data? No, it's not that ConfigMgr is not giving you accurate data. It's that you're actually not understanding how ConfigMgr works to do that, and you're ending up with some confusion, right? So I just illustrate that. Be really careful about any SQL queries that you run directly against the database. I don't recommend that you run SQL queries against the database at all. If it's something that you need to know in an ongoing way, build a report, right? And make sure you validate and vet that report fully before you trust it, right? Don't assume that some collection query or report query or, some database query, collection and report queries are not in this conversation, that you get from the web in a blog, don't assume it's right. Understand it before you start using it for production purposes. And I can't underscore enough, please try very hard to avoid direct SQL queries against the database, because it just does offer up another level of potential confusion than what you might otherwise need to deal with in the console, right? Okay, so enough about that. Similar to decommissioned, there is another record type called obsolete. So when in ConfigMgr you have a new device record come up, which might happen when you reinstall the client or whatever, right? For a system that ConfigMgr already knows about. In other words, the hardware IDs between the new system and an existing record of the database, they match. Then what ConfigMgr does is it will mark any existing systems in the database as obsolete, right? And that's an effort to just keep the view as clean as it can be so that you understand what you're looking at, right? Okay, enough about that. Let's turn our attention to reports. So there's a number of reports that are available. This top one is the one I showed you for online and offline status. This is not in your list of reports. It's something that I built, but all the rest of these are, right? All the rest of these are. And I'm not going to take the time to go through and run all of these reports, but I would absolutely encourage you to do that, because that way you'll understand the richness that we even give you in terms of reporting to be able to understand client health status and so on. And here's another thing. With SQL Server reporting services, you can actually subscribe to a report that might be particularly interesting to you, and then daily or whatever schedule you say, then we will go ahead and be able to provide that report in a subscription format. They can be sent out in various formats and so on, right? So it's a very good thing to take a look at. All right. So in terms of, this is a topic right here that could take a long time to go through. I'm going to hit this very, very quickly. And so this topic, one of the things that we want to do is to keep our database as lean, as trim as it can be, right? And one of the ways that we can do that is through maintenance tasks. In fact, let me bring in the console, which seems to have closed on me again, and look at that. So if I go under administration and then sites configuration and then sites, then I will have the option up here to look at maintenance tasks, site maintenance right here, right? And there's a ton of these maintenance tasks, and going through every single one of them would take us a long time. There are two that I'm interested in for this discussion. I'm interested in a lot more of them for just general use, but for this discussion, there's two. And so the first is delete aged discovery data right here. So what does that do? Well, Steve, it deletes age discovery data. Well, yeah, it does, right? And it's enabled by default. If we look at the properties of this, it runs every 90 days on Saturday. And so when it runs, what it will do is it will look at all of the devices in your database, and it will say, hey, device, do you have any discovery data within the last 90 days? And if the answer is yes, it passes on by and does not delete that system. If the answer is no, it will delete that system, right? Well, that's a good thing, right, Steve? Yeah, it is, but it's not the best thing. So this one's enabled by default. Then there's one down here called delete inactive data. Delete inactive, where is it? Inactive. Where is it? Right there, sorry. This one is not enabled by default. In Steve's opinion, this one should be the one enabled by default, and the other one should be disabled by default, right? What this one does, same kind of thing, by default, 90 days, and once a week, or sorry, 1 day a week, Saturday, it will go through, if you turn it on, and it will evaluate every system in your database and anything that's marked as inactive. Remember that discussion we had about active, inactive, right? Anything that's marked as inactive, which is based on the 3 key properties, heartbeat discovery, policy check, and hardware inventory, anything that's found to be inactive, it will delete, right? So why do you think, Steve, that this one should be on by default and the other one shouldn't? Well, here's the reason. So this one up here is very, very properly named, delete age discovery data. So what I said is that if we go through and we find a system that has had valid discovery data within the last 90 days, we won't delete it. Well, first of all, I think that 90-day threshold is too long. You can judge for your own environment. I usually am somewhere between 14 and 30 days, but you can judge for your own environment. But what that means is that there somewhere is a discovery method that is populating the database with data, and we're looking at that discovery information and making a judgment on it, which is absolutely true. So where are we getting that discovery data? So if we go up into hierarchy settings and look at discovery methods, these are all of the discovery methods that are available to you. Now, the delete inactive client data, this is the only discovery method that is factored in. Whereas delete age discovery factors in every single one of them, right? So here's the point, and may apply to you, right? If you have Active Directory in your environment, then most customers will actually turn on Active Directory discovery. And it used to be that in the ConfigMgr 2012 timeframe, I think it was 2012, anyway, I would tell every customer that had Active Directory discovery turned on and also had a very poorly maintained Active Directory to turn that off. Because what would happen is it would discover stale records again and again and again. Well, now, yeah, there's ways that you can configure this, and this is not an in-depth discovery discussion. There's ways you can configure here what you want to discover, what you don't. And so that's valid if you have, again, places in Active Directory that you can pull data that it's reliable. But oftentimes even there, that wasn't the case. So now with this set, right, if you don't have this turned on and you're doing Active Directory discovery, you should absolutely turn this on and set this. Now, these default to 90 days. I like around 30 days, but again, not a deep discovery session. Go and evaluate that yourself. But here's the point. If you have a computer, call it computer Y, and that computer is currently in Active Directory, but it has been off the network for a year, not to be seen. It's been recycled, it's out of the building, but it's still in Active Directory, then it will never send a heartbeat discovery record again. And so by inactive client data cleanup, it will get removed pretty quickly, right? Depending on your settings. But if this is turned on, system discovery, if this is turned on and we don't have a properly maintained Active Directory and we also don't have those checkboxes checked to help us filter, then it's very potentially likely that you'll discover that system again and again and again and again and again with Active Directory system discovery. And that single discovery method will populate data in the database. So when the delete age discovery data task comes along, it says, oh yeah, well, I haven't heard heartbeat. Yeah, I never did network. Okay, I don't have any Active Directory group, but I do have this Active Directory system discovery record. It's within the last 90 days. I'm moving on. And so you leave junk machines in your database for a long time, and they shouldn't ever be there at all. They should have been cleaned up because they are truly gone from the network. Anyway, this is a discussion that can take a lot longer, but I wanted to give you the highlights, right? And then finally, as we wrap up, a couple of tips and tricks. So we focused in this session on Configuration Manager and client health. Rightly so. That's what the session's about. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that Configuration Manager, really I shouldn't even be referring to it as Configuration Manager anymore. I should be referring to this as Microsoft Endpoint Manager, right? Because that is the name of the product. Config Manager is one component of Microsoft Endpoint Manager, just as Intune is one component of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Here's a point that I think is something we should put in our documentation as an advantage of a configuration called co-management, where you manage a device, Windows device, with both Config Manager and Intune. If you have a device that is having a Config Manager client problem, then obviously you can't use Config Manager to go repair that device, most likely, right? But if you have a co-managed configuration, you now have Intune that also has a pipeline to that device and can deliver some configurations onto that device that would help you restore the health of your Config Manager client, right? That is a huge benefit beyond all the other benefits of co-management in my mind if we're thinking about client health, right? The other thing I just want to show you, and it's not there yet, right? It's not there yet. Let me just open up this browser window in private. So I just want to show this to you, even though it doesn't have any bearing. Endpoint.microsoft.com doesn't have any bearing on the client health discussion today. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. Oops. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, see, I told you I can't type and talk at the same time. There we go. Okay. And yeah, so I just showed this to you because this is 2002 environment that you're seeing of Config Manager. And what we're starting to do is push things into this common cloud console, right? And so if I go to devices and I look at Windows devices and I look at my list here, just to show you, this device is managed by Intune. These two are not. These two are managed by Config Manager, yet you see them in the console. This one's managed by Config Manager. You see it in the console. Here's Intune only. Intune. Here's another Config Manager, Windows 7, so you know it can't be managed by the MDM channel. Here's a domain controller, so you know it can't be managed by the MDM channel, but they're here. So the point is, in 2002, we are starting to introduce our tenant attach strategy, where things are starting to pump into this unified console. There is nothing here that I've seen about client health so far, but stay tuned to this, and I would expect, I don't know, this is just Steve guessing, right? I would expect things to start to bubble in more things like that, and more things overall into that console as we go forward. Anyway, so that's it, right? I wanted to spend this time talking about client health, a very important topic. Hopefully there's some things here that you can use as you work on client health. So we will end the session here, and we'll see you next time.